Shepard was asking for it for three.
Well, he felt it, didn't he? He was begging.
Oh, what a play by Matt Mitchell.
To Watson, sees a lane, takes it underneath. Montana three.
This is a clinic. This is Aztec basketball.
Aztec Nation, what is up? This is the Aztec Breakdown Podcast. I'm your host. My name is Tron. Before we get into the show, let's get all the obligatories out of the way. You can find me on Blue Sky, on TikTok, on Instagram, all at Aztec Breakdown. You can find Kyle on Twitter at Call Me Kinslow. You can find Austin at It's Austin Bolton. You can find Carly at Car McGee. You can find Jacob at Aztec Analytics. Be sure to like, follow, subscribe, comment, 5 stars, whatever is appropriate for whatever platform you are listening on. And you can find the show on iTunes. You can find it on Spotify, really anywhere that you may or may not listen to podcasts. With that all out of the way, let's get into the show here. We got some games to go over. We got some off-the-court stuff to go over. And I'm going to share who I would have in my all-conference first team, as well as the winners for the major awards. So with that, let's get into it. On Saturday, it must have been Saturday, the Aztecs traveled to Wyoming and won in a tough game at Elevation. It was a close game. It was a stressful game to watch, to be sure. But in the end, I still thought it was kind of a confidence-building game. A little bit, honestly. The big thing for me was watching BJ Davis seem to find his groove again. That was very nice, especially he had hit 2 for 2 from the field the game before, which wasn't, it's not high volume, but is a solid showing. Hopefully a confidence-building showing. And that could have gone away during the Wyoming game when he got whistled for a technical foul. That was, as best as I could tell, over literally nothing. Maybe something happened off camera that we didn't see. I don't know, but he got a technical foul that could have been a thing that shot his confidence again. But instead, BJ Davis finishes with 18 points. He finished 5 of 8 from the floor, plus added a few free throws in there, had 3 steals, had a couple rebounds, and so 18 points on 8 shots is highly efficient. And it was nice to see that player again. It felt like it had been a while since we had seen it. I know he's had a game or two since his hot start where he's been really good offensively specifically, but this was another game, and it was very nice to see, and it was kind of a hopefully a portrayer, I can't even think of the word, but just a sign of things to come, right? And then Miles Bird also had a good game. Maybe not as good in terms of efficiency, but still a good game nonetheless. He also had 18 points. He did it on 14 shots. So, like I said, not quite as efficient, but still very good. He had 3 assists and no turnovers. He threw in a couple steals there as well. One of them was a big it felt like a momentum-shifting play where Wyoming and the Aztecs were kind of trading leads there for a little bit in the second half. And then the Aztecs got up 1, and then Miles Bird got a steal and finished at the other end, and now the Aztecs were up 3, and they never relinquished the lead after that. It did get close at the end when the Aztecs were missing free throws and not getting any stops. That was not the prettiest thing to see, to be sure. But they did just enough to come out with the win, and Miles Bird and BJ Davis were both looking good in that regard. It was not lost on me that the game after I talked about how Nick Boyd might be the best, if not number 2, then the best point guard in the conference in this point in time. The game after I said that Nick Boyd comes out, he shoots 2 for 8, he misses 2 free throws. He did have 6 assists again to only 2 turnovers, which is fantastic, but only 7 points, and 7 points on 8 shots. Just not a great showing offensively. The assists were good, but outside of that, not a great showing offensively. It was not lost on me that happened, and it was of course this would happen, once the stress of the game was over and I'm able to reflect on it. It was of course this would happen right here. So, in hindsight, something that's a little funny. But BJ Davis and Miles Bird both looked great. Heidi has been looking solid, starting in place of Magungwath. His free throw shooting has been an issue, and I think that's something that heading into next year, that needs to be a big point of emphasis. Not to get too much into next year, but Heidi has a chance to be a starter next year when JCJ is gone, but it's going to be hard to do that if he's missing free throws at the rate that he is. But he has been so much improved from the beginning of the season. It's been night and day, and he's finishing very efficiently at the rim. He was 3 for 3 against Wyoming. I think he was 5 for 5 against UNLV. Honestly, I'll look at that in a second. But he has been playing very well. He hasn't been super flashy, but just within his role, I think he's been doing a really good job filling in for Magungwath. So that's been super encouraging. Against Wyoming, JCJ had 12 points. He contributed in the ways that he does, so that was great. He was a big part in kind of turning around the rebounding battle. The Aztecs were getting destroyed on the glass by Wyoming, and JCJ came in and got a couple key rebounds on both sides. And turning around might be a strong word, but he did enough to be able to get the favor back on the Aztec side, right? Because the Aztecs were down by 1 at the half despite being out-rebounded by like 18 or whatever it was, something ridiculous. And so, you get a couple extra rebounds and you finish the game only down by 12 or 14 and you're in the game, right? And that's what JCJ was able to do. So shout out to him for that. He's been, while I've been critical of him at times, he's been a pretty solid and mostly consistent piece, which is something that a young team like this really needs. And so that's been super encouraging. Moving on to the UNLV game, though, that one, no lie, had me sick watching it. And it's never just one thing. It truly was a combination of a number of things, but that game had me sick. The Aztecs travel to Las Vegas, where they usually just own the competition regardless of who it is, and they lose 74-67 against the Runnin' Rebels. It was hard to watch. It really was, and it ended up being the first time, I believe they said on the broadcast, since 2013 that the Running Rebels swept the Aztecs in the season series. So that was gross, and it was hard to watch. Nick Boyd had a good game, 19 points on 15 shots. His assist-to-turnover ratio wasn't as good, but it was still in the positives. He was able to do things, but the support, there wasn't. I don't even know. I don't even want to say the support wasn't quite there because other guys were scoring. I mentioned Heidi earlier, 5 for 5, 10 points. That was really good. He didn't have any rebounds though, so that's a thing for sure to be looking at. Miles Bird had 15 points, but that was on 14 shots, so not super efficient there. I mean, Bird did contribute in other ways. He had 6 assists to 3 turnovers. He had 4 steals, 3 blocks, 10 rebounds. So Bird ultimately was probably doing what he needed to do. He scored more points than he took shots, right? He had a positive assist to turnover ratio. He was affecting the game defensively, and he was on the glass. So while it wasn't as efficient a scoring performance as the Wyoming game, it was overall a better game, I think. That's completely fair to say, given the defensive impact, the disruption, the rebounding, the passing. That was all good. BJ Davis had 10 points. He was 0 for 4 from the 3-point line. So he had 10 points on 9 shots, which once again, not super efficient, but probably you would want to think good enough. And probably in most games it would be good enough, right? Like when you look at the box score, none of it looks terrible from the Aztecs' perspective, right? They had 4 players scored 10 or more points. I guess nobody else scored more than 5. That's not great, but it's not terrible. They only had 10 turnovers. The rebounding did go into UNLV's favor, but it's not like it was by a lot. It was just by a couple rebounds. The Aztecs committed a couple extra fouls, but not by much. Like, none of it looks terrible. You wouldn't think, but there was a couple things, right? And the obvious one was UNLV's shooting from behind the arc was insane. They shot 50%. They shot 12 of 24 from outside the three-point arc. And I remember going into halftime, it's tie game. I think it was a tie game. No, the Aztecs were up by 2 going into halftime. And it's like, great, the Aztecs are up by 2 despite UNLV shooting, I think it was 47 or 48% from behind the arc at that point. And I was like, this is a good sign if you're San Diego State, because it hasn't been the prettiest game, but despite UNLV shooting the lights out, you're up, and they aren't going to shoot that way in the second half. Like, the mean regression is going to come, the variance is going to kick in, and they aren't going to hit these same shots again. They'll still hit some, obviously, but they aren't going to, they'll finish, even if they finish at like 40% instead of 48% for the game, then the Aztecs win. And instead, they bumped their percentage from that 47.5, whatever it was, up to 50. So they shot better in the second half and ended up winning by 7. That was like, it wasn't fun to watch, to say the least. And I didn't think, there were definitely some open threes, but I didn't think it was necessarily so much like, oh, like the defense is so bad in those situations. It just kind of sometimes shooters shoot and it goes in. I didn't see anything that had me super worried from that point of view. Like, I don't think that's going to happen again if we're looking for a silver lining there. There were other things, however, that weren't as much of a silver lining. There were a couple plays, it seemed like, where the Aztecs were maybe, they hit a big play, they hit a 3, they hit a dunk, something, and they're there trying to, whether they're hyping themselves up or shush the crowd, whatever it is they're doing, they're kind of like celebrating it. In the meantime, UNLV ran down and scored. And that has to be, I think, unacceptable. And I do see the value in hyping yourself up, hyping your team up, hyping the fans up if they're there. There is value in that. But it can't come at the cost of easy points the other way, right? And that happened at least twice that I noticed watching live. It happened at least twice. And while that's not the difference in the game, everything being the same, it's still not good. And realistically, not everything would have been the same. And so potentially, it could have been the difference in the game, right? So that's a thing. What else? The game was just hard to watch. That was basically the only real thing. The free throw shooting isn't great. I think that's not news. It's not terrible. I got 60% from the line. It's not great. You would like to have that be more. That was like Nick Boyd's one downfall, was he shot 2 of 6 from the free throw line. Like, this is an 80% shooter. I think 78% shooter going into that game from the line, and he shot 2 of 6. And those things combined, if you combine Nick Boyd shooting, really the team shooting, but Nick Boyd's shooting specifically, since he had half of the misses, with those easy transition buckets where they're celebrating and then try to catch up and can't, that could be the difference in the game. That would at least be a tie game, everything else being the same, right? And so that's a thing. And some of those were 1-and-1s too. You missed the front end of a 1-and-1, and so you're kind of like missing even more. And so the free throw shooting is I guess, I said earlier, the box score mostly looks good. The free throw shooting's like the one thing that wasn't great there. What else? The UNLV game is just, I'm still just like, my brain is racked even thinking about it. I think one of the takeaways from the UNLV game, and this isn't necessarily a thing that's news per se, but the team just doesn't really seem to have any shooters, just overall. And when you look at the percentages that the team is shooting from deep, there's maybe one player who's shooting above 35%. You got Nick Boyd's at 34. Miles Bird is 31. He's technically a tad below 31, which isn't great for a guy who shoots threes as much as he does. That's pretty bad. Let's look at his 3-point rate is a lot. It's half of his shots, more than half of his shots come from deep, and he's shooting 31%. That's not great. BJ Davis is at 37. That's good. And Magoon Gwath, I guess, is at 36, and he's been out. So him coming back might help. That's also on a small sample size, though. JCJ's at 34. This was one of the things I was worried about with him coming into the season, was everybody was stoked about his 44% shooting last year. And he's down to 34 right now. And that can still, he's also on a pretty small sample. So, like, if he comes in and has a couple games where he goes 3 of 5 or something like that, that'll change relatively dramatically. But it still wouldn't even be up at like 40% at that point. And so that's the thing. And I guess Kimo Ferrari's at 43 on 14 shots total. So not really counting that one. But I guess you have 2 players above 35% on the team. And that's not great. And if we want to count Nick Boyd, he's close. He's at 33.6, and he seems to have been trending up lately with his shot, and we know he can shoot because he's done it. Hey, sorry about that. He's done it his whole career. So we know he can shoot, but he hasn't been great. Bird hasn't been a shooter his whole career, so that's discouraging. Hopefully, I guess the hope with him is that just he's had a thumb injury for a while. He's had a hip injury for a while. And I guess the hope is that those are what's causing the bad shooting, because at one point in the year he was up around 40%, and it's just taken a steep dive since then. But the team just doesn't have shooters, and it's hard to be good offensively when you don't have shooters. And it's going to be something that holds the team back, whether it's conference tournament, whether it's the big dance. If they make it that far, it's going to be what holds the team back. The defense is really good. They're currently 16th at Bart Torvik. It's not quite the elite level of teams past. I know Austin and I have compared this to the 2022 team when it was Matt Bradley's first year as an Aztec, and they were, I think, like the second best defensive team in the nation that year, but they were like 170-something offensively. This team is 16th defensively and 132nd offensively. So similar, not exactly the same. Like that team had the defense to make up for its offensive woes, and this team largely still does, but not to the same amount, although I guess they're slightly better offensively. The lack of shooters, though, is a problem, and hopefully they can get hot here over the next few games in the tournament and against Nevada coming up. That would be fantastic, but it's a problem. I think the other thing, kind of quickly, that has been disappointing, and I don't know what to blame for it or to what extent there is anything to blame for it, is it just seems like Miles Bird isn't the same guy he was in the beginning of the year. And I remember recording a show early in the year and talking about the thing that I was enjoying about Miles Bird over the first 4 or 5 games was that he had this mentality of like, we are not losing this game. And he would go into takeover mode and shots would start falling. And I mean, the UCSD game, first game of the season, was like the perfect example of it, where he just like went off and the team won. And it was fantastic. And we haven't, I don't think, seen that in a little while. And the last time it kind of tried to happen was the UNLV game. Miles Bird would come down and he would jack a 3 and it would miss. And if you're just going to do that and it's going to miss, then you're hurting your team. And I guess that's like goes without saying because you're missing the shot, but like it feels so much worse than missing the shot, because you could have maybe worked for a better shot. Like he would just run down and like jack a 3. You could have worked for a better shot, one that's not off the dribble, maybe one that's at the rim, maybe you draw a foul, any number of things. And instead he just like ran down and just shot the 3 and it didn't go in. And that's like a momentum killer to a certain extent. I think even more so than if you work for it and miss. Maybe that's just me, but that's the thing. And so it's been a bummer to not see that same version of Miles Bird. And it could be any number of things. It could be physical. It could be mental. It could be that it like just the variance, the luck of it all, right? Maybe he just was kind of on a heater earlier in the season and that heater is gone. And that's all that, like I said earlier, he had 15 points. He had 10 rebounds. He had 6 assists, 4 steals, 3 blocks. Like it was still a great stat line, but that he shot 2 for 10 from behind the arc on the game. And if you're shooting 31%, you shouldn't have over half of your shot be threes, probably. And it's a tough conversation to have if you're a coach, I'm sure, because you don't want to take away the player's confidence. You love how confident Miles Bird is overall. You want him to have that confidence that he can be that guy. But if he can't actually be that guy, how do you say that? How do you tell him? And then if you do tell him, does that take away his confidence? And then he can't even be the version of the guy that he was. There's so much that goes into it. I'm rambling a bit. I guess in short, just the UNLV game was hard to watch for the umpteenth time. I do think after the game it made me want to take a step back for a couple reasons. One was I've been kind of on this train that next season, how good can this team be if pretty much everybody returns, right? You're losing. I'm pretty sure you're losing Kimo Ferrari, but he's a walk-on and doesn't play a whole lot of minutes, so not a huge loss there. You're losing JCJ and you're losing Wayne McKinney. And while I support both of these players, I think they definitely each have their own strengths. They also definitely have their own weaknesses, and no player's perfect. But I feel like it might not be the hardest thing to find players, even if they aren't better, that maybe fit in the system better, potentially. I don't know. That can be a conversation for another time, but just the fact of, hypothetically, if everyone else was to return, and you get Reese Waters back because he said he's returning, how good can this team be? And the UNLV loss has really made me think, how good can this team be? And it might be a little bit of an overreaction. And I guess, assuming they make the tournament, which they still should, but we can get into that in a minute. Assuming they still make the tournament, they should only be better next year. They'll have another year of experience. They'll have more chemistry together. You potentially bring in another, potentially you can get an improvement at one of those two spots. I guess they have Tay Simmons coming in, the freshman, and so that might be hard to improve, but maybe you bring in one transfer and that improves something somewhere. Who knows? I guess it's also should be noted that Guath has been out the last few games. Do the Aztecs win that game against UNLV with Magoo and Guath? Maybe. We'll never know, obviously, but it's possible. So I guess that has to be considered too. But it made me cool down my projection slightly. I guess we don't know how much improvement there's going to be. But then I think the biggest issue with the team isn't necessarily a skill or lack thereof. It isn't necessarily like a specific attribute that you fix by skill development or bringing in a new player. It just seems to be consistency. And there's a number of things that can affect that, and youth is one of them. So it is very possible that next season the team could be better just by virtue of being older and being more consistent, because then they don't drop some of these games that they've dropped. They don't have these close games that they've had that have hurt their metrics, which in turn hurt their seeding. A couple of things like that could be better just by virtue of getting older. There is potentially something to say about if you're Miles Bird, Tom Mosier on Twitter mentioned that Miles Bird is kind of like this year's Jalen House. And I didn't see that at first, but since he said that, I've been seeing it a little bit. And if you've been listening to the show, you know my opinions of Jalen House were that he was a great player, but that his impact on the team was so big that if he was having an off day, it would bring the rest of the team down with him. And if he was feeling himself, if he was feeling it, he would bring the rest of the team up with him, right? And I do wonder. I don't think Miles Bird is nearly that to the level of Jalen House was, but I do wonder if there is some of that happening. Miles Bird before the season said himself that was something he wanted to work on, was not getting too low when the times are down and not getting too high when the times are good. Another year might help with that if we were to assume that he comes back. I haven't checked the draft boards lately. I would assume his recent play hasn't helped, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's hurt either. We'll just have to see in that regard. But I guess overall, I'm kind of just thinking out loud here. I do think the team will be better next year, assuming everybody returns, which is a big assumption. But I am rethinking to what extent they'll be better, because it would be largely, for the most part, just everybody returning, and you get 2 new players maybe, and one of them is a freshman who probably would end up not playing very much. So that's some food for thought, I guess, in that regard. Speaking of players leaving, this could be a good chance to segue into something that I didn't see personally, but it was mentioned, I heard about it elsewhere. And that's that after losing to Colorado State and getting blown out by Colorado State over the weekend, the Utah State fan base, I guess, let their players know how frustrated they were, would be the nice way to say it. And it sounded like there were a number of players or maybe just player parents or people close to the players that were making it sound like, given the backlash that the team faced, some of these players were considering leaving the program. And I think, for one, that's a shame. I think as fans, you shouldn't be that intense about it, probably, I guess. Not towards them. Be intense about it with each other. Fine, absolutely. If you want to talk about how awful a player is between you and your friends, go for it. Absolutely. I think to call them out on social media is a little different. And that's kind of a shame as it is. But the reason that I want to point it out is because this is something that I talked about before, and I had gotten some flack for it. And my point was, as fans, we are like representatives of the fan base. And it should be our goal to not give the players any extra motivation to go somewhere else. Right? We as fans of San Diego State doesn't have the same NIL or really any kind of resources as any of these big programs, the Dukes, the Kentuckys, the Michigan States, whoever, right? The resources aren't the same. And so as fans, we need to not give players extra motivation to leave when there might already be some there, right? I think everybody, if they take a step back, if they take a step back and think about it, it's hard to get upset at a player for leaving for a better financial opportunity elsewhere. I think if you really take a step back, I think most everybody would agree with that. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say. It is upsetting for you personally, absolutely, because you have formed a connection with this player. It's 100% a parasocial relationship, absolutely, but still, you formed a connection with this player. You've been rooting for them. You've been a fan for them, and it feels like they didn't love you back, and that's because they didn't. That's how parasocial relationships work. But it's upsetting, and I'm not trying to say it's not upsetting. However, what I would say is, if they're already tempted to leave for the money anyways, and you want to keep them because you have this connection, then you shouldn't be giving them extra motivation to leave by also berating them on social media. I think that's kind of my ultimate point, right? We have a chance. If you want to have an impact on the program, you can absolutely donate, contribute, whatever, to any of these NIL programs, and that helps. However, if you're donating, right, and a player can make $100,000 a year at San Diego State, just as a random number, whatever. Or, actually, back up. They can make $100,000 here, but with that, they're going to get ridiculed. Or they can make $200,000 elsewhere and maybe not get ridiculed. Why wouldn't they take the $200,000, right? You don't want to give them extra reason to leave. And there was, I was getting a little bit of flack for it, and there was a couple basic responses. One was that, they're pros now, they're getting paid, so they need to be tough enough to take it, to take the abuse, for lack of a better word, which is, one, just dumb. If you work at a job, you are a professional at that job, and you would not like it if people came up and told you how bad at your job you were. Right. So it's dumb, and it's just an excuse to that you give yourself to try and belittle somebody else. It's lazy, quite honestly, is what it is. And then the other thing, which is valid to a point, but the other thing is like, it's going to happen anywhere else they go as well, so they might as well get used to it here. And sure, if they leave a place, if they leave Utah State, if they leave San Diego State, if they leave wherever, and they go somewhere else, those fans, realistically, yeah, that's a realistic expectation that they will find whatever backlash that they found here, they will find it there too. It might even be worse backlash. Maybe trying to quantify that is very hard, but maybe it's even worse. However, once again, I would point out they're getting paid more there, right? And so if you're getting the same amount or even like 10 or 20% more of the ridicule and backlash somewhere else, but you're getting paid twice as much, you're still probably going to go take that more money, right? And it would, once again, if you really take a step back and think about it, it would be hard to fault somebody for that. However, if you give them a chance to truly be different here, in the sense of they'll still get paid. It might not be as much as over there, but they'll still get paid, but they'll have like a place that they can enjoy themselves. That if that's something that you can provide that no one else can, that there's value in that. And not all the players will see it, but some will. And so that's kind of the point. I guess I can probably get off my soapbox here, but that was kind of the point, and it was just a very concrete example where people were coming out and saying, our players are thinking about leaving this program, a program that just won the regular season last year and won their first tournament game in decades. I think I don't remember. I had looked it up at one point when their last tournament win was. I think it was like the 90s or something. It would have been a long time since Utah State had won a tournament game. They won their first tournament game last year. A lot of those players are still on that team, and now some of them are talking about like, we lost this one game, and yeah, we lost it very bad, but we lost this one game, and this is how we get repaid for being currently in second place in the conference, I think, or maybe it was third place. But either way, they've had a good year. They won the conference last year. It was just, it was crazy. So my call to Aztec fans is to be different and give these players something here that they can't get anywhere else. That should be the goal, because they can get money elsewhere. They can get playing time elsewhere. But if we can give them a spot where they don't get ridiculed on social media, that's something they can't get anywhere else. That doesn't mean you can't be critical. I've been critical this entire show of certain players, right? I just, a couple minutes ago, I talked about Miles Bird maybe not having that like killer instinct anymore, right? You can absolutely be critical, but there's ways to do it, and there's appropriate avenues of doing it. If you want to berate the players, like I said, to your friends, please do so. I'll do it with you if that's what it takes, but not calling them out on the social media. Let's give them a reason to stay. Let's give them something that nobody else can give them. Okay, coming down off the soapbox, let's get into some of the fun stuff. So, let's do the awards first. For me, personally, Player of the Year, I think, has to be Donovan Dent. I think if you look at it from the point of view of like best player on the best team, it's quite obviously Dent. I think if you look at it as like the most impactful player, there's definitely an argument to be made that it's Donovan Dent. Donovan Dent is currently first, like the best player in the conference in terms of my composite metric. He's second in player impact plus minus, but it's a little close. So there's a number of things to be said about him. I don't think that's controversial. There's a couple other players you could maybe make an argument for. Neat Clifford could be it, especially if they finish in like second place. That would be largely over achieving their projection. I think I had them, sixth or seventh in my preseason. I'm kind of sad because there was at the beginning of the season, the Nevada beat writer projected the Aztecs to be seventh, and I was like, there's no way they can be seventh because they're at the very least going to be better than Colorado State, and yet here we are. And that wasn't even supposed to be a slight against Colorado State. I just thought the Aztecs would be better, and yet here they are, looking at somewhere between, I guess, second and fifth place. I guess they can finish anywhere in there, second and fourth maybe. Yeah, they're looking great. So I guess Neat Clifford could be the competitor there, but I think Donovan Dent has to be the guy. I don't think that's controversial or it's hard to dispute. Freshman of the Year, have to go Magoon Guath. And that's I know I was critical of him to certain extents early in the year. And I wasn't alone, but it was never that I thought he was bad. There were aspects of his game that I thought could be better. And I was definitely hedging against trying to think that he's going to be this like game-altering player or whatever. Not even game-altering, but like, I don't know, just this like all-everything player that people were making him out to be in the beginning of the year. I didn't think that was going to happen. And I think it hasn't happened, but where it has, it has happened in very specific ways, but just not all everything, right? It's Magungwath is, I guess I'm going to jump forward here and then circle back. Defensive Player of the Year, also Magungwath. I've been putting out on Blue Sky different measurements, different graphs, different spreadsheets and stuff of just showing how Magungwath is the best defensive player. I think he is third right now in defensive player impact plus minus behind Miles Byrd and Nelly Jr. Joseph. He is second in defensive Bayesian performance rating. He is first in defensive points over expectation, although I do need to update that. That's about a week old. But before he got hurt, he was on pace to, set the record for the single season record for points saved in terms of defensive points over expectation. So his defense has been phenomenal, and that's part of the reason why I would vote for him for Freshman of the Year too, because at the point he was injured, that was the case. He was the Defensive Player of the Year, and it was another one where I'm like, that shouldn't be like that controversial. Like Nelly Jr. Joseph, you can make an argument for, and it's not even that he's not deserving, because he is in the top 3 of defensive player impact plus minus, but it's just not the same. It would, in large part, be fueled by him being on like the first place team. It would be, there would be more of that than there would be for Gwath for sure, considering Gwath isn't on the first place team. I don't think that should be that controversial. And then combine that defense with he was, at the time he was hurt at least, he was scoring more points than any other freshman in the conference. And so defense and offense, Freshman of the Year, shouldn't be controversial. For the Newcomer of the Year, I put Obi Agbim from Wyoming. Dude has been a killer, and he is going to transfer somewhere else next year and get a bag, and I guess we'll see what happens. But he has been very, very good. Sixth man, I always struggle with picking six men. I went with Latrell Davis for sixth man of the year. He just seems like what I think of when I think of six man. I think of like a flamethrower that can come off the bench and just score a bunch of points really quickly and then go back and sit down and let the other guys play defense or whatever, I guess. And that's what Latrell Davis largely seems like to me. Most improved player. Oh, you know what? Actually, no, yeah. Most improved player. I might go with Neat Clifford, honestly. And some of that would be like a nod to what's it called? Like him not getting player of the year, I guess. Like it would be like, let's throw him this one. Mason Falslev would be another good choice. But there's a number of choices for most improved player, I think, that would be valid. Andrew Meadow actually might even be the best choice objectively. I still might do Clifford because of, like I said, not getting player of the year. But Andrew Meadow might be the best, like, pure choice. And then coach of the year, you could go Rick Pitino. There's how do you choose coach of the year, right? Do you just do the coach of the team that won the most games? That's valid to do that because winning games is hard. I kind of like the point of view of like who outperformed their expectations the most. And that could still be kind of Rick Pitino. I think I had the Lobos, I think I had them third and they're first. So it's not super outperforming expectations, but they have genuinely been better than I thought they would be. So you could go Pitino. I might actually go Medved out at Colorado State because, like I said, I think I had the Rams 6th or 7th, and now they have a chance at being second. I think solely second if they beat Boise State. So that's a thing as well. And then just all conference first team. I'm not going to do 3 teams. Just first team. You got Donovan Dent at the point from New Mexico. I got Ian Martinez from Utah State. I got Nate Clifford, Colorado State. I got Tyson Degenhart, Boise State. And I got Nelly Jr. Joseph from New Mexico as well. Other players that were considered would have been Nick Davidson from Nevada. Obviously Miles Bird, but he's just been kind of falling off lately. Mostly just his shooting accuracy for the most part, right? If he comes back next year and does the same thing but shoots it better, then he's going to be player of the year probably. It would be hard to argue that. Mason Falslev, Utah State, was another guy that I think should get some consideration. But yeah, that is the first team right there. And with that, just a couple more quick things. So the Aztecs are playing Nevada in Viejas to close out the season on Bart Torvik. They are 7-point favorites currently. It looks like, as I'm recording this today, on Thursday, Nevada is ranked 76th in the net. And so the Aztecs are in a little bit of a weird position because that puts them as a quad 3 game. And so if the Aztecs win it, they just won a quad 3 game and it doesn't really help them. If they lose it, there's a good chance that Nevada moves up in the net enough that it becomes a quad 2 loss. And it's not super hurtful, but you also don't want to play around with that because then if Nevada loses its first game in the tournament and they move back down and it becomes a quad 3 loss, that's devastating for the reasons I've talked about before. And so, crucial game. Probably a must-win game. And also, just win the game so you get a little bit of momentum going into the conference tournament. As a reminder, I'm going to be at the conference tournament. It's my first one. If anybody would want to say hi, I'd love to say hi. I am so nervous that the first and probably only Mountain West tournament I ever go to is going to be the first one in the Brian Dutcher era where they don't make the championship game. So that's what's keeping me up at night. I am in quite a privileged position since that's what's keeping me up at night, but it is what it is. Regardless, I'm being kept up at night. And then looking at the seeding for the big dance, on bracket matrix, San Diego State is currently still a 10 seed. I have mentioned before that bracket matrix sometimes takes a little bit of time to catch up with the results. It sometimes takes a few days. I still wouldn't expect San Diego State to drop. UNLV was a quad 2 loss on the road, so I wouldn't expect San Diego State to really drop too much because of that. They're on every bracket except for one. One bracketologist left them off, so they should pretty safely be in the field. I've mentioned before that getting all the right teams in the field, like the good bracketologists get 67 out of 68 every year. It's about the seeding is what, really separates you as a bracketologist. So they should safely be in the field, and we'll just see where they end up. It seems like it'll be hard to get higher than a 9 for sure. Utah State and New Mexico are still both in the field. They're both 9 seeds in bracket matrix. And Boise State is the first team out right now. They are appearing on 59 out of the 118 brackets. And so they're in the hunt. Nebraska shows up on 59 of the brackets, and Oklahoma shows up on 56 of the brackets. Or not 56, 66. 66 of the brackets. So they're in the hunt. If they have a good tournament, maybe they can play themselves in. I hesitate to say that, and for reasons that I've also talked about on the show before, but they have a chance. That being said, their last game is against Colorado State. It's at home, and the Aztecs play in the first round of the tournament. They play the loser of that game, and given everything, I'm kind of hoping Colorado State wins that. It could mean that Boise State doesn't get into the tournament unless they win the conference tournament. But the reason I would root for Colorado State is because since the Aztecs played a loser, the Aztecs have swept Boise State, and I just kind of like that matchup more than the Colorado State matchup. Regardless, you're going to have to beat the best to be the best, so maybe it doesn't matter too much, but I'll be rooting for Colorado State there. No shade to Boise State. I've never really had problems with Boise State fans. Colorado State fans have been the best, but I've never really had problems with Boise State fans. But that's just how that goes. And with that, I think that does it for this one. Aztec fans, let's go get a win against Nevada on Saturday here, and I'll catch you next time.
On the floor, it's Butler with 2 seconds. He's got to put it up, and he wins it with the jumper.
Mitchell's feeling it. Now he's feeling it even more. What it do, Matt Mitchell? Shackle, the Flynn for the win. It's good! Oh, Malachi Flynn! On the rim.
2 to go. Butler has to put it up for the win. Butler sticks it at the buzzer. And a steal. Darion Trammell will coast in for the layup.
Franklin with 2 seconds forces the shot. It's good. The Aztecs advance. They've won it on the shot by the player of the year.
Miller, he put it behind his back. It's taken away by Butler. Lob it up. Oh, down. Big finish. Keyshawn Johnson.
Now we have tasted it. We're coming back. We're coming back.